Imagine this: a man stands accused in front of a crowd. The whispers circle like vultures. Some say he's ruthless, others say he's cunning, others paint him as dangerous. His enemies expect him to flinch, to argue, to beg for understanding. But he does none of that. He stays still, calm, unbothered, as if the voices around him belong to another world. His silence unsettles them more than any defense ever could. Because here's the truth Machiavelli understood long before anyone else. When you defend yourself, you put yourself beneath judgment. You're already conceding that their opinion matters more than your power. And power, real power, doesn't explain itself. It doesn't bend to prove innocence. It doesn't justify, it endures. The instinct to defend ourselves is baked into us. Someone questions your integrity, you rush to clear your name. Someone spreads a rumor, you hurry to set the record straight. Someone mocks you and the words itch on your tongue. You want to strike back, to explain, to make them see who you really are. But Machiavelli knew that this reflex, this urge to justify, is exactly what destroys your authority. Because the moment you argue, you've already admitted the possibility that their accusation could matter. If their words were beneath you, if they truly carried no weight, why bother defending at all? Kings don't argue with peasants. Lions don't explain themselves to sheep. The very act of defending yourself is an act of submission. But notice how the opposite works. When someone refuses to explain, refuses to bend, refuses to scramble for approval, something strange happens. The crowd shifts, doubt creeps in. If he's not denying it, maybe it's true, but then why is he so calm? Why does he look untouched? Why is he unafraid? That calmness becomes a weapon. It creates mystery. And mystery, Machiavelli understood, is more powerful than truth. A defended truth feels fragile. A silent mystery feels unshakable. Think of how history remembers the figures who shaped it. The most dangerous leaders, the ones who could command armies with a word, never wasted time on rebuttals. Caesar didn't pause to argue with every senator who whispered against him. Napoleon didn't waste speeches trying to convince people he was legitimate. Their legitimacy was proven not by their explanations, but by their results. Power doesn't defend itself, it demonstrates. It doesn't argue, it acts. And this is the Machiavellian trick. Never defend yourself, because the second you do, you step down from the throne of power and kneel before judgment. But if you refuse, if you stay untouchable, suddenly the judgment turns back on them. They start to look desperate, loud, needy. And you, by saying nothing, become the figure everyone can't stop speculating about. Here's the thing, the world is addicted to explanation. We live in a culture where people overshare every thought, every feeling, every justification. They think clarity will save them, but the more you explain, the more you give away. You surrender your mystery, you bleed out your power in words, and you hand your enemies the exact material they need to cut you down. That's why Machiavelli warned: when accused, when attacked, when misunderstood, never rush to defend. Let them talk, let them doubt. Let the accusations pile up like waves crashing against stone. You remain the stone, unmoving, because if the stone started shouting back at the waves, it would only look weaker. What people don't realize is that silence is not emptiness, it's tension. It pulls others into the vacuum you create, and that vacuum is where power grows. The less you say, the more they wonder. The more they wonder, the more they fill in the blanks with their own imagination. And imagination, fueled by fear or awe, always paints you larger than life. That's why the greatest rulers understood that mystery multiplies power, while explanation diminishes it. And you can see this even in the smallest interaction. Watch the person who gets accused of something and immediately blurts out excuses. They look guilty, even if they're innocent. But watch the one who just smiles, who doesn't blink, who lets the accusation hang in the air without answering. Suddenly, the accuser looks unstable. The silence flips the stage. The one who was supposed to be cornered becomes the one in control. This is why Machiavelli taught that your reputation is not defended by words, but by force, by results, by image. A prince doesn't go door to door arguing his case. He rules so decisively, so visibly, that argument becomes irrelevant. The same applies to you, even if you're not a prince. In your workplace, in your relationships, in your ambitions, if you waste energy defending yourself, you've already played the weaker role. But if you hold your ground, if you let your actions speak, if you show indifference to the whispers, you create the aura of power. And aura matters more than truth. Because in the game of influence, perception is everything. Truth can be debated. Perception can only be felt, and nothing fuels perception like mystery. Of course, this doesn't mean you should never respond to anything. Machiavelli wasn't naive. He knew there are times when silence alone isn't enough. But here's the trick. When you do act, you don't act with explanations. You act with decisive moves that make explanations unnecessary. You don't argue you're strong, you demonstrate strength. You don't defend your loyalty, you show results that prove it undeniable. You don't deny weakness, you bury it under victories so loud that no one even remembers the question. In other words, you flip the frame. You never meet their accusations on their terms. You change the game entirely so their words look like dust in the wind compared to your presence. And that's the art, to resist the pull of defense, to let others waste themselves in chatter while you conserve your energy for action. It's not easy. Everything in you will want to correct them, to speak, to defend. But the moment you do, you shrink. You step into the role they created for you, the accused. Better to remain untouchable. Better to leave them wondering, because wonder breeds respect, and respect breeds fear. And fear, Machiavelli knew, is safer than love. What makes this even more profound is how people betray themselves when they defend. They don't realize it, but in trying to explain, they reveal desperation. Every word of justification says, "Please believe me, please approve of me, please don't abandon me." And once the scent of neediness is in the air, power evaporates, because power is allergic to need. The one who needs approval loses it. The one who seems not to care, who doesn't bend, who lets accusations burn without even flinching, that's the one others start to follow, even against their own judgment. People are not drawn to explanations, they're drawn to certainty. And nothing feels more certain than the figure who doesn't justify. Think about the way silence unnerves people in everyday life. In a heated argument, the person who suddenly stops talking, who refuses to play the game of back and forth, instantly seizes control. The other side starts stumbling, raising their voice, throwing out more words, while the silent one just sits there like a mountain. The imbalance grows with every second. The accuser begins to doubt themselves because they expected resistance. They expected a fight, and when there is none, their blows land on empty air, making them look foolish, overextended. That's the genius Machiavelli pointed to: never defend. Not because silence is weakness, but because silence magnifies the weakness of your attacker. Even the psychology of guilt works this way. When someone is guilty, their instinct is to over-explain, to pile up words in a desperate attempt to convince. Innocence doesn't explain. Innocence simply is. When you're walking in truth, when you know you have nothing to prove, you don't chase after belief. You carry yourself with quiet indifference. And here's the paradox: people are more likely to believe you when you don't try to convince them. Your refusal becomes its own kind of evidence. But the moment you argue, you plant doubt. Why argue unless there's something to hide? Why scramble unless you feel threatened? Silence, on the other hand, suggests confidence. It suggests superiority. It suggests that their words never even reached your level. This is why rulers and leaders throughout history often cultivated the art of mystery. They knew that the less they said, the more others projected onto them. Machiavelli himself advised princes to be careful with their words, to reveal little, to maintain an aura that was partly unknowable. Because the human mind hates gaps, it fills them. If you leave silence, people will fill it with fear, awe, speculation, anything but certainty. And every speculation enlarges you. The man who never defends becomes a myth. The man who argues becomes just another voice in the crowd. Consider the story of a commander accused of corruption by his rivals. If he defends himself, the court debates his innocence. If he stays silent and continues leading victorious campaigns, the court doesn't care. Success overshadows suspicion. The battlefield speaks louder than accusations, and that is Machiavelli's point. Results drown out words. Don't argue about who you are, show them. And if you can't show them, remain silent, because mystery is still more powerful than weakness paraded in explanation. Now, this doesn't mean silence is passive. True silence, the Machiavellian silence, is active. It's a weapon. It creates discomfort in others, forces them to question themselves, and puts you in the dominant position. You aren't retreating from the fight, you're making the fight look ridiculous. That's the essence of flipping power. They expect defense, you give them indifference. They expect protest, you give them calm. They expect justification, you give them mystery. And in that moment, the stage flips. The accuser becomes the performer, sweating under the lights, while you, untouched, become the audience, serene and untouchable. Nothing is more destabilizing to an opponent than realizing they can't drag you into their frame. And this applies beyond politics or courtroom. In relationships, the person who always rushes to defend themselves ends up feeling small. The one who simply lives their truth, who doesn't scramble for validation, commands respect without asking for it. In business, the entrepreneur who constantly explains why their idea matters looks fragile. The one who just builds, just delivers, just wins, without justification, becomes the one everyone can't stop watching. In friendships and negotiations, in every sphere of life, the same law holds. Explanation is weakness, mystery is strength. Of course, this takes discipline. Because silence is not the natural response. The natural response is fire, defend, explain, justify, scream. But natural instincts are often the enemy of strategy. Machiavelli's brilliance lay in showing us that power is not about instinct, it's about inversion. Doing the thing your enemies least expect. They expect you to defend, then don't. They expect you to plead, stay calm. They expect you to justify, give them nothing. And watch as their certainty collapses into confusion. The beauty of this approach is that it saves energy. Words drain you. Arguments eat your spirit. Justification is endless. It feeds on itself, because once you start defending, there's always another accusation, another doubt, another voice demanding more proof. But when you refuse, when you stand still, you conserve your energy for action. You deny them the satisfaction of pulling you into their storm. And that calmness, that refusal, is not only more powerful, it's liberating. You're no longer chained to the opinions of others. You rise above them. And from above, you dictate the terms of power. Think about how children test boundaries. They accuse, they provoke, they poke, waiting for the adult to snap. The adult who snaps becomes their equal, dragged into the chaos. The adult who stays calm, who refuses to defend, who simply stands in their authority, is the one the child eventually respects. The principle doesn't change with age. Human beings, whether children or grown, test power through accusation. The weak defend, the strong remain unbothered, and the unbothered always win. Machiavelli's genius was not that he invented cruelty or cunning, but that he stripped human behavior down to its bones. He saw that power rests not in truth, not in justice, but in perception. And perception is built not on words, but on presence. Your presence either commands or it concedes. Every defense is a concession. Every silence is a command. And once you understand this, you start to see the game everywhere. Politicians scrambling to explain scandals look weak even when innocent. Artists who lash back at critics seem insecure even when brilliant. Leaders who argue with their enemies look smaller even when they're right. Meanwhile, the few who remain silent, who stay calm, who rise above, always appear untouchable. And untouchable is the essence of power. But there's a deeper layer still. Refusing to defend yourself doesn't just protect power, it transforms you. It forces you to detach from the addiction to being understood. It makes you comfortable with being misjudged, with being hated, with being doubted. And that comfort is rare. Most people bend their entire lives around being liked, being validated, being accepted. The one who can walk through fire without needing defense is free. And that freedom radiates. Others feel it. They may not like you, but they respect you. They may not believe you, but they fear you. And fear, as Machiavelli said, is safer than love, because love is fickle. Fear endures. So the next time you feel the sting of accusation, the urge to defend, pause. Feel the fire rise in your chest. And then don't give it to them. Don't rush to prove. Don't spill your energy in words. Let the silence do its work. Let the mystery grow. Let them twist in their own noise while you stay still. Because that stillness isn't weakness, it's the hidden blade of power. And when used with discipline, it cuts deeper than any argument ever could. There's a strange irony hidden in this principle. The more you refuse to defend yourself, the more defenders you attract. When you stay silent in the face of accusation, something curious happens. Others step in. Allies, onlookers, even strangers begin to argue on your behalf. They fill the gap your silence leaves because human beings hate unresolved tension. If you don't defend yourself, they will. And their defense is 10 times more powerful than yours ever could be. Why? Because it doesn't look like self-preservation. It looks like loyalty. It looks like truth revealed through someone else's eyes. And truth delivered by others will always outweigh truth spoken by the accused. That's another layer of Machiavelli's brilliance. By refusing to defend, you invite the world to do it for you. But here's the warning, this only works if you hold the line with absolute discipline. Half silence is weakness. A little explanation followed by retreat makes you look cornered. True strength is the stone face, the immovable stance, the refusal to give a single inch. People sense the difference. They know when someone is holding back anger versus when someone truly doesn't care. Indifference is the ultimate mask of power, and it can't be faked halfway. You must wear it fully. You must let the noise wash over you like wind against the mountain. Only then do people start to feel your weight. It's the same reason ancient rulers surrounded themselves with ritual and silence. The king didn't argue with the peasant, because the moment he did, he was no longer a king, just another man with a voice. Authority demands distance. That distance is maintained by mystery, and mystery is protected by silence. Machiavelli saw this in courts where words were used as weapons. The courtiers who argued, who tried to defend, were always devoured. The ones who stayed unreadable, who let rumors circle without response, became shadows too thick to penetrate. They lived above the game, and that elevation itself became their defense. Think about how many great figures throughout history let their reputations burn in rumor, but refused to lower themselves into mud fights. Some were called tyrants, some were called immoral, some were accused of things they never did. Yet the refusal to explain became part of their myth. People whispered in corridors, speculated in taverns, argued in pamphlets, but the figure himself remained silent. And that silence became terrifying. If he was guilty, why didn't he deny it? If he was innocent, why didn't he defend himself? That unanswered question made him larger than life. He became not just a man, but a mystery. And mystery always beats clarity in the theater of power. Even in ordinary life, you can see how this plays out. Imagine two coworkers accused of the same mistake. One rushes to explain, piles on excuses, writes long messages to justify. The other says nothing, continues working, and lets results speak. Who looks weaker? The frantic one, no matter how innocent. Who looks stronger? The calm one, even if guilty. Because people don't judge truth directly, they judge confidence. They judge presence. They judge the aura around you. And that aura is shattered the moment you scramble to explain. But silence preserves it. Silence says, I don't owe you my defense, and in that refusal lies authority. Now, it would be easy to mistake this for arrogance, but it's not arrogance, it's strategy. Arrogance shouts, demands recognition, brags about its power. Strategy doesn't shout, it whispers, or it says nothing at all. Strategy uses silence as a weapon because it knows that people will hang themselves with their own words. Machiavelli wasn't telling us to be blind to reputation. He was telling us to master it, to stop playing on the weak ground of explanation, and instead fight on the higher ground of perception. And perception is always tilted in favor of the one who doesn't need to prove. The hardest part is letting go of the addiction to being understood. Most people live their lives begging to be seen accurately, begging to be validated, begging to be loved for who they really are. And in that begging, they throw away their power. Machiavelli is cold but liberating here. You don't need to be understood. You need to be obeyed, respected, or feared. Being understood is optional. And in fact, being misunderstood often works in your favor because mystery grows in the cracks of misunderstanding. If people don't know exactly who you are, they will imagine. And imagination always paints you bigger than the truth. But silence is not just for accusation, it's for insult as well. The man who responds to every insult looks fragile. The one who ignores insults, who walks through them as though they were whispers in the wind, creates an aura of untouchability. He looks above it, and people follow those who appear above. Because everyone is drowning in noise, everyone is trapped in petty arguments, everyone is enslaved by the urge to explain. The rare one who doesn't stoop to that game becomes magnetic. His silence is louder than their noise. Look at the way predators in nature move. The lion doesn't roar at every animal that crosses its path. The eagle doesn't flap in panic when challenged. They conserve their energy, waiting for the precise moment to strike, and the rest of the time they remain still. That stillness is not weakness, it's power under control. Human beings sense the same thing in one another. The one who doesn't defend himself looks like the predator conserving energy. The one who scrambles to explain looks like prey trying not to be eaten. And in every interaction, whether we admit it or not, people are deciding, predator or prey. Silence signals predator. There's another layer still. The refusal to defend yourself is not only about how others see you, it's about how you see yourself. When you stop defending, you stop living in reaction. You stop living chained to the opinions of others. You start living as the cause, not the effect. That shift is internal power, the kind no one can strip away. and that inner power begins to radiate outward. People sense it. They may not know why, but they feel the calmness, the groundedness, the immovability. And in a world where most people are shaken by every opinion, the one who doesn't flinch becomes rare, becomes unforgettable. Of course, silence must be paired with action. If you refuse to defend yourself but fail to deliver results, your silence becomes emptiness. But when silence is paired with strength, with decisive moves, with victories that drown out words, it becomes unstoppable. Machiavelli knew this. The prince who stays silent in court but wins in war is untouchable. The prince who stays silent but fails is finished. Silence is not the whole game. It's the frame that makes victory look even more inevitable. It's the cloak that keeps you mysterious while you move pieces on the board. And when the victory comes, it looks effortless, as though your silence itself was the plan all along. So never mistake silence for passivity. It is an active stance, a calculated strike. It says, I do not step down into your frame. I do not play your game. I refuse to argue because I am the one who decides, not the one who pleads. And in that refusal, you flip the power. The accuser, the critic, the enemy, they look small, frantic, unsteady. And you, by saying nothing, become the one they cannot touch. This is the art Machiavelli left us. And once you taste its effect, once you feel the calm surge of holding silence in the face of noise, you will never go back to the weakness of defense. There's a reason the most dangerous kind of man is the one you can't read. When he's accused, he doesn't deny it. When he's praised, he doesn't glow. When he's insulted, he doesn't flinch. Every reaction you expect from him dies before it's born. And that absence of reaction is terrifying because it leaves you alone with your own uncertainty. Machiavelli knew that people crave predictability. They want you to rise when attacked, to crumble when shamed, to shout when cornered. When you deny them that satisfaction, you don't just withhold your defense, you take away their entire sense of control. And nothing unravels an enemy faster than the feeling that their strikes land on air. It's not just silence, it's a deeper refusal. You are refusing to acknowledge their frame of reality. You're saying without saying that their opinion doesn't exist in the world you live in. And if their opinion doesn't exist in your world, what power does it really have? This is the true inversion of power. The enemy believes he is pulling you into the court of judgment, but you refuse to even step into the building. Instead, you remain outside, untouchable, watching him exhaust himself shouting into empty air. That image is what Machiavelli teaches us to master, because every word of defense is not just noise, it is proof that you have entered their frame, and the strongest frame always wins. When you defend, their frame wins. When you stay above it, yours does. You can see this in the smallest details of life. Someone mocks you at a gathering. The weak man argues back, trying to prove he isn't what they say. The strong man smiles, lifts his glass, and talks to someone else. Which one do people remember? They remember the one who didn't even bother, because that man showed, without words, that the insult was beneath him. And here's the trick: when something is beneath you, it no longer matters if it's true or not. Its very insignificance is the proof. That's why defense is a trap. The moment you defend, you admit the accusation has weight. Better to treat it as nothing. Better to let it die in silence. And yet the urge to defend is so human, so deep, that resisting it feels like drowning. That's why this tactic is rare. Few can stand in the fire of false accusations without screaming back. Few can let their name burn without rushing to put out the flames. But the ones who can, they rise above humanity into myth. Their names are etched in a different kind of stone, because people cannot stop speaking of the one who never explains. They argue about him, they project onto him, they invent stories about him, but he never corrects them. And so the myth grows taller than the man himself. That's the Machiavellian paradox. Silence feeds your legend more than words ever could. But don't mistake this for cowardice. This is not about shrinking away from battle. On the contrary, it is about fighting on your chosen ground. Defending yourself is fighting on theirs. Refusing is forcing them onto yours. And once the battleground shifts, their weapons turn useless. They came prepared for argument, for denial, for protest. Instead, they face a wall of stillness. And stillness defeats more enemies than swords. Machiavelli understood that wars are not won only with armies. They are won in the theater of perception. And the silent man, the one who never defends, is always staging a theater far bigger than words. Think of the times in your own life when you wasted energy defending. How much did it cost you? Nights replaying arguments, days writing long messages no one read, hours trying to persuade people who had already decided against you. Did it work? Or did it only leave you emptier, weaker, resentful? That is the hidden tax of defense. It drains your spirit. But when you stop defending, you save all of that energy. You reclaim it. And with that energy, you can build, create, act. You rise while they waste their breath. And your rising becomes the answer they can never defeat. This is why Machiavelli's lesson is not just about politics, it's about the soul. To never defend yourself is to be free. Free from the chains of other people's opinions. Free from the addiction to approval. Free from the endless slavery of being understood. And in that freedom, you stand alone, untouchable. Your silence becomes not just a tactic, but a declaration. I am no longer a prisoner of your judgment. I belong to myself. And when a man belongs to himself, when he needs nothing from anyone, he becomes unstoppable. Because nothing you take from him can wound him, nothing you accuse him of can bind him. He has already walked beyond the courtroom. He has already chosen his throne. And yet, the crowd will always test you. They will accuse, they will mock, they will drag your name through fire. They will tempt you to break silence, to scramble, to justify. That is the moment of choice. If you yield, you join the crowd. If you hold, you rise above it. The higher you rise, the louder the noise below you will grow. But you will no longer hear it the same way. Because once you have tasted the power of indifference, once you have felt the surge of standing in silence while others crumble in noise, you know there is no greater weapon. It is not just a trick of power, it is power itself. This is why Machiavelli's words, written centuries ago, still burn with relevance. Because the instinct to defend is eternal, and so is the power of refusing. Every empire, every dynasty, every throne has been shaped by this law. And your life, though smaller in scale, follows the same rhythm. When you defend, you step down. When you refuse, you ascend. It is that simple, it is that brutal, and it is that liberating. So picture this: the next time someone attacks your name, imagine the court they've built for you. Imagine the chains of defense they want to lock you in, and then refuse to step inside. Let them rage alone in the courtroom of their own making while you walk free outside. That is the flip, that is the art, that is the secret Machiavelli left us. And once you master it, you will never return to the weakness of defense. Because in the end, what is the highest power? It is not being loved, not being understood, not even being feared. The highest power is being untouchable. To stand so firm that no accusation can move you, no insult can reach you, no rumor can bend you. To walk through fire without the need to prove, to explain, to justify. That is sovereignty, that is mastery, that is freedom. And so remember this with every breath: never defend yourself. Not because you are weak, but because you are too strong. Not because you are guilty, but because you are untouchable. Not because the world will believe you, but because the world will never own you. Silence is your shield. Mystery is your crown. Indifference is your sword. And with them, you flip every attack into power, every accusation into myth, every enemy into noise fading against the weight of your presence. Stand in that silence. Live in that refusal. And watch how the world bends, not because you defended yourself, but because you never needed to.